Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis, your host. And for all of those out there who celebrate Christmas, it's coming up in a few days. Merry Christmas to you all. And we are running a show next week, too. Someone asked me if I'm running Christmas and New Year's week. And yes, to that, we're running both weeks in a row. Our guest tonight is Jonathan Dover. He's a veteran law enforcement officer. He was also a Navajo Nation Ranger. And he did a lot of paranormal investigations in the last many years that involved all kinds of weird phenomenon. So we may touch on some of those besides our usual topic of UFOs. Speaking of other topics, we will be running the Everything Else show randomly. So if you'd like to find out when those shows are going to pop up, they're going to be on YouTube only. So you want to subscribe to this channel and click the little notification button. That's really the only way you're going to know about those shows in particular. Those are on varying topics, maybe some paranormal, but all different types of topics. Just conversations about things that I personally find interesting. You may not, but anyway, if you want to subscribe and click the notification bell, you'll get those notices. So we had trouble with our guest. That's why we're a couple of minutes late. We had trouble getting him on video and audio. So he's going to be on the phone the entire time tonight with us. That means that we will not be able to take calls, unfortunately. Actually, I do have a way to do that myself. I got myself an extra number, so I may try to do that tonight if possible. If a lot of people are putting in the chat that they'd like to talk to him and ask him a question. If you are going to ask a question in chat, if you would put it in all caps so I do not miss it. If it's an interesting question and the timing is right, I will ask those questions you post. Our blog this week by Charles Lear. I got to meet Charles a couple of days ago. It was a lot of fun down in New York City. And the blog that he wrote this week is a UFO and Bigfoot-like creatures in Pennsylvania. A lot of this has to do with past guest Stan Gordon, who's been at it this investigating since he was young, very young, very nice guy. He's been on the show several times. Great blog. So check that out over at podcastufo.com. And while you're there, if you'd like to support the show, you'll see the link that says support the show. How about that? And that's on Patreon for $2 or more a month. And we do appreciate everyone that listens to the show. And we do also appreciate all our supporters. Thanks so much. We couldn't do this show without you. So we are going to jump right in. Again, thank you all for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. If you celebrate Christmas, have a wonderful, safe, and a great time. And here we go with our guest, Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
Jonathan, thank you.
There you are. I almost panicked again because you were just not there earlier. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to meet you out in Arizona. And so if you would, can you, I think it's really fascinating that you probably had no idea that you were going to get involved in these weird type of situations when you first got into law enforcement, I'm believing. Yes?
I had no idea. Although throughout my whole career, like a lot of other law enforcement officers, experienced cases of high strangeness, UFO sightings and the like. But back in those days, you didn't say anything about it. You just kept it to yourself because you didn't want to be ridiculed by the other officers. So I'm actually not the only one, but I am one of the only two on the Navajo that we were assigned to investigate these cases. So in other words, to put it in another language, we were voluntold.
Voluntold. Now, from what I understand, from what I've heard you say in the past, is that regular police officers were sent out to investigate, and there was sort of a ridicule thing going on. Is that basically what happened?
Well, they wouldn't ridicule people outright, but the cases were taken lightly, and you have to understand that if somebody gets punched in the nose, that takes precedence over there's a Bigfoot in my backyard that's scaring me. And so, and they're not equipped for that kind of investigation. There's no, within police agencies, they have number systems. So you're going to get maybe a 4-digit number to describe what you're doing. And for Bigfoot cases, we would describe them in the number series as a wild animal complaint.
Oh, wow. Because you just didn't have any place to file it, basically, right?
That's right. And that's how the majority of agencies actually across the United States are. There's nothing in their system that allows for paranormal investigations.
Right. So before we get into all this, just another thought, comes to mind is the oral traditions of the Navajo people. Over the years, I heard you also say that these oral histories were discounted because they were not written histories. However, the oral histories were very, very carefully carried down from one generation to the next generation, and that every word had to be spoken exactly the same or similar without any mix-ups. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, it's called an oral tradition, and the Navajo are very, very rigid about maintaining those type of traditions. So when we talk in Navajo history about what happened in the past, you're not allowed to embellish it, and you're not allowed to leave anything out. You have to say it exactly the way it was told to you.
And I hear not necessarily Navajo, but I've heard of other people term as sky people. Was that ever part of the traditions?
Navajo does have a definite connection to what we would loosely classify as sky people. They have a long tradition. In fact, a lot of the Yeviche dancers that you see are depictions of beings that have come to the earth to communicate with natives.
Uh-huh. And what I do a lot of appraising and for basically any personal property, and a lot of the Hopi things are very interesting to me. The Kachina dolls and figures, and I don't know what the depictions are exactly and what the stories are that go with them, but there's certainly some very interesting creatures that they create in their dolls and things.
Yeah, the most of the Kachinas that you're referring to are depictions of gods that have come to Earth to meet with the Hopi in the Hopi culture, and it seems like this is very universal amongst all Indian tribes across the United States. Today, you're talking greater than 500, around 570 recognized Indian tribes just in the United States alone.
Wow, that's amazing. And what do you know what that is down from over the years? For instance, any idea of, say, when this country was kind of taken over by from England? When we landed here, let's say 230, 40, 50 years ago, when we founded as a country, I should say, when we the Declaration of Independence, we were separate from England. Is that way down from them, or were there about that same many? Do you know?
They don't know the exact numbers, but there's estimates that run anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 separate tribes that
isn't
were
that something?
in the United States.
Isn't
And
that something? Wow.
and from a native perspective, one of the reasons that we are not very distrustful of the government, well, we are actually really distrustful, is that over the period that Columbus first came and they started writing treaties, there have been over 6,000 written treaties with Indian tribes in the United States alone. And out of all those 6,000 plus treaties, not one was ever kept.
That's really sad. That's really sad. Yes, I know where I grew up mostly in the state of Maine, and there was some type of land grant that was found in the last, I don't know, 40 or 50 years ago, where basically all of northern Maine belonged to, I think, the Micmacs or some tribe up there. And there was a that was really something, and there was a monetary exchange for that. Once again, all these kind of minuscule monetary things to make up have never really really accounted for what happened, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but all right, getting back to the oral traditions. You say the sky gods. Um, is it was that also, as far as you know, was that other besides Navajo? Was it the other Kachina dolls? Was it all the same thing? I mean, that's kind of interesting if it was tribe to tribe, a very similar thing.
Yeah, there were a lot of similarities in the tribes, and in fact, the Navajos and the Hopis often intermarried and spoke they spoke different languages, but they were bilingual in those languages. The Hopis could speak Navajo, and Navajos could speak Hopi.
Oh, how about that? So I know that you have had a lot of really strange things happen. I don't know if you want to jump right in, but I would like to find out basically what happened in the first call that you ever got from anyone where something strange happened.
Well, the first call that I got that me and Stan worked on. Stan was my buddy during the time, and he's the one that speaks with me. We received a call. Well, let me back up here. The first call that was taken was involving a Bigfoot case. And this was up in the Shiprock area, Shiprock, New Mexico. And it's along the San Juan River there in a place called Bloomfield. And there's a lot of farming communities there. The San Juan River runs through there. And we had over 30 witnesses that came forward to the local police department and said there's a Bigfoot in this area. We've seen it, we've heard it. And the police lieutenant there laughed at them and actually put in the papers, I wonder how much these people have had to drink. And so they didn't want anything to do with the police department. They contacted the Navajo Rangers, and we sent a 6-person crew up there with night vision equipment, forward-looking infrared systems, and we stayed there for 3 days and 2 nights, scouring the area, on stakeout at night, tracking and interviewing witnesses.
Wow! So you really took that seriously right away. And what happened? What were the results of what you investigated?
We found foot track evidence. We found evidence of, in one case, the thing had stepped over a 5-strand barbed wire fence, which sits about maybe 5 feet tall, and it just stepped over it and kept going. So we found hair evidence caught in the barbed wire. The foot track evidence was about 18 to 20 inches in length of the foot. The stride distances were 5 foot from heel to heel. For me to do a 5-foot stride, I would have to do the splits.
Yeah, right.
And I can't do the splits.
Yeah. So, and what about the impressions? Go ahead.
Oh, so we tracked this thing through the brush, and we even found places where there were marshy, boggy areas that were had maybe a half inch of water on the top, and you could see where this thing had picked up big logs, maybe 30 inches in diameter, and just picked these waterlogged things up and tossed them aside. And the guy that was with us that knew more about Bigfoot actually told us that it was looking for grubs underneath the logs or some kind of food source.
Wow. And what about the impressions? Were they deep enough where it would look like it would have the weight of whatever would be that large?
Yeah, yeah, it did. And a lot of them were in sandy areas, but we tracked it. We got into the brush where the brush was so thick, the tamarack, Russian olives and stuff, that you couldn't even get through there on your hands and your knees. And yet this thing just pushed through that stuff, and the material just came back and closed it up again.
So would you say that whatever this thing was, it like walked through the area and that was it? There was no signs of it being, or no accounts of witnesses that said this thing was often in the area?
We've had reports off and on throughout the years. In fact, one just recently that a group of Bigfoot were coming into a field. They had corn planted there, and the family would leave piles of corn at the edge near the river for the Bigfoot to come and eat it, kind of like an offering. They said that after a while, these Bigfoot were chased away by a what they called an alpha Bigfoot, a male, and chased these Bigfoot away, and then proceeded to kill two of their horses that were in the corral.
Oh,
they ended up selling the third horse because they were afraid that that one was going to get killed too. And since then, they haven't seen anything more on it. But they showed us the area. We were over there with a film crew looking at all that stuff.
Wow. And when the horses were killed, what was apparent on how they died?
They had scratch marks, all large scratch marks from what the witnesses described. And they said that it was pretty horrific. They said early on, when the other Bigfoots were there, they were friendly, and they actually went to the horses, and believe it or not, they said that they would take the hair from the mane and braid it. And I've never heard of that. So that was interesting.
Yeah, another strange mystery in this whole thing. So, but there were, one of the reasons you're here is because there was also UFO happenings that you were involved in, and I've heard you talk about them before. But I want to continue on if that's okay. So, with this case in particular, sure. I mean, you really can't solve anything like this because you never found this creature. But did you get the first samples that you found in the barbed wire? What did you do with those?
The Bigfoot expert that was with us sent it to a lab. He never disclosed where the lab was for obvious reasons, that the lab would be inundated with calls asking them their opinions and stuff. So he sent it to a lab for analysis. Later on, he told us that the analysis came back and all it said was unknown carnivore.
Unknown carnivore. Boy, a lot of times you hear that people speculate whatever their Bigfoot are, that they're not, they're more omnivore, but they're saying this was they thought it was carnivore. That's pretty scary.
That's correct.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the ape family; they're all omnivores. They're not one is a carnivore. Wow, bizarre. But anyway, yeah, I've always had mixed feelings about Bigfoot, and I don't know why. It seems like some things, like I know people are seeing UFOs. There's so much material, evidence, and backed up data to corroborate that. But when it comes to Bigfoot, seems like there's only one really interesting film, the Patterson Gimbal film, whatever it's called. I can't think of the name of it.
Yeah.
But you really don't. It just seems like at this time, if people are still seeing Bigfoot, we'd really get some conclusive. I know I sound like a UFO debunker in a way, but it seems like we'd see some video out there at this point in time of a Bigfoot by now. It just seems strange that we don't have anything that I know of, unless you know different.
Well, well, me and Stan have investigated a lot of Bigfoot cases, and we've actually tracked Bigfoot. Both me and Stan are what you would consider combat trackers. We track man when in the backcountry, when somebody commits a crime and they're on the run, we're the ones that go after them, and you learn how to track. And combat tracking, to this day, I do not do any deer hunting, no small game hunting, because man is by far the most interesting thing to hunt. So what happens is we've tracked it for miles, and the tracks disappear in trackable ground. So there's earth all around there. If he would have taken another step, he would have left a track, and the tracks just suddenly stop as if he just got jerked into the sky. We backtrack it the other direction and to see where he's coming from. And we run into the same thing. The tracks appear in trackable ground. And it's just like he was just dropped there suddenly. So we have a theory that we've come up with over a lot of years of doing paranormal cases. Of course, we're just like everybody else. We're looking at things that connect. And the one thing that connects all of these cases, hauntings, UFOs, Bigfoot, even the Navajo Skinwalker, is that this idea of multi-dimensions and being a pan-dimensional accounts for how Bigfoot can disappear. Even up in the Pacific Northwest, they had a gentleman that was looking at a Bigfoot that was crouched down near a tree, and he said that this thing just vanished right in front of his eyes. And then you have the Skinwalker Ranch incident where a Bigfoot was seen, a hole appeared.
Yes.
At nighttime, and there was a blue sky, and this thing came crawling through, fell on the ground, stood up, and walked off.
That's right.
And so
crazy. And that was witnessed by several people, scientists, one of them that was just sitting there and observing that. Bizarre.
Right. So we think that these things are appearing, they're popping in and out of our dimension, whether by accident or on purpose. We have no idea, and we really can't speculate that direction. But if we have this idea of dimensions as these walled structures. There's a wall here and a wall on the other side, and we're in our dimension and the other dimensions are next to us. But these dimensions are actually overlapping, and to me they're more like clouds that are intermixed, and every now and then something can actually pop through and appear in our dimension. We had a haunting case where coins were what they call apporting, or appearing in our dimension and falling to the floor. Stan did a case where 65 coins over 2 days appeared, fell to the floor, flew across the room, hit people in the back, and when they landed, he had to photograph every one and collect it as evidence, and map out in the room where it fell, and all the 65 coins landed heads up, which is a statistical impossibility.
Is that are these like an American coins, international coins? What were these?
These were all American coins. They were pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters. 14 of them were wheat cent pennies.
Oh yeah.
None of them, I need to go back through those wheat cents. Maybe there's a 1943, copper.
Right. When there were zinc pennies then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steel,
So,
they call them steel
and
pennies, but they were zinc. Yeah. Wow.
so there,
Yeah,
and Stan had one that was a Taiwanese 2 yuan coin that fell in his kitchen.
that is so bizarre. Yeah. One of the things about when people talk about that theory, and I hear it often, when it comes to the UFO topic, the possibility of the dimensions. But the thought I always have is, well, if that's the case, are we going into can we possibly slip into another dimension? If they can slip in and out of ours, and something that seems primitive, like a Bigfoot, not knowingly highly intelligent. I'm not sure. I mean, I've never had a conversation with one, but anyway, just the fact that I mean, it's not like a machine or something like that, or how it could dip into this dimension. So it's another big curiosity. Could we actually go into another dimension? And if so, how? And how would something get back? How would something come back if a Bigfoot pops in, comes through that portal or whatever it came through on Skinwalker Ranch, that was witnessed? How does it get back to where it came from? All that stuff. And how did this thing, when you were tracking it, how did it appear? And then how did it disappear in another location? It's strange.
Yeah.
So no answers, just speculation, really, right?
Well, yeah, but we're gonna, no matter what, we're gonna try to, put it in a box that we can understand, and that's what we do. That's what you do as a cop, is you try to find why it happened. Not only why, but how, where, when, who. You try to find out the answers. And so this is something that, you think about all the time. Wake up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. and go, oh, how about that? That's a possibility too. So, you do, just like any criminal investigator, you think about these things a lot.
I bet you do. And like you just said, when you can't sleep, you think about things in the middle of the night. But what about when you speak with other people that may help you with the investigation? I mean, is it? I'm just going back again to the time when you're going through these, looking at these tracks, and you see them go into nothing, and then appear in another. When you backtrack it, see it appear all of a sudden. What is your first thought? I mean, how can this happen? I mean, that must be something that boggles people when you're in a group and you're looking at something like this. How could this be happening?
Well, we just accept it. We look around. We do what they call cutting for sign, which is usually working from the last track in a spiral, of widening circles, to see if you can see maybe it jumped and you're just not seeing the next track. Maybe it's rocky and you have to go further to pick up the next track where it went. Or maybe there's a pebble in the ground that's pushed down. You're looking for all kinds of little things. And when you don't find that next track, then it gets weird. The other thing that we've noticed over a lot of years of doing this is that anytime we had reports of Bigfoot, we had corresponding reports of UFO sightings that were increasing at the same time. So we saw correlations between the sightings of Bigfoot and UFO sightings in the same areas.
Yeah, I've heard that. There's one incredible story that a witness told one time, where she saw, this one is really one that's hard to believe, but it was like a large orange orb, and it kind of popped, and all of a sudden there was a Bigfoot there. That's another, I shouldn't be laughing. That's another one that I've heard a witness talk about. A question that comes up from Mary Grace is, how do you investigate these things? What avenue do you go down to and totally investigate something like this?
Okay, The way we investigate these cases is usually what would happen is we'd get it through our dispatch. They would call in, they'd talk to our dispatcher, they'd assign us a case number and give it to us. What happens in our case is we would make arrangements to go speak directly with that person. In the days of COVID, of course, you're doing more and more phone interviews, but we don't have good communication on the reservation. In fact, right now I'm 50 miles away from home in Flagstaff, Arizona, talking to you because I get good cell connection, but apparently not good enough to get on the video. So
I appreciate that, really. That was very nice of you to do that.
What we do is we interview the person. Now, we start by looking at body language, at micro expressions, everything that you're doing in a criminal case, we're replicating. We're going to be asking you a lot of embarrassing questions, such as, do you use recreational drugs? If you do, when was the last time you used some? Do you use prescription medication? And if so, what kind of prescription medication? And have you taken any recently? Do you drink alcohol? If you have, when was your last drink? We're going through this progression of seeing where you are in your mental state and anything that could possibly impede your perception of what you may have saw. From there, we'll ask you to relate your story, and we generally will not comment. One person does the interview. The other person, if Stan has questions and I'm talking, he'll slip me a note saying, ask this, or how about this, or whatever. So, and if we can, we were some of the first officers to have body cameras that were recording in video with a lot of our interviews. So this was back in the early 2000s, before any departments were carrying them.
Wow.
And so, I mean, we were buying them off of eBay, so they were not very good quality, but we were more interested in getting the story correct. After that comes what they call ancillary, subjective ancillary. We would go back and ask them, can you describe in more detail about this or about that? Or you said this, can you elaborate on this? You go back and forth, and you're trying to be, get as much detail about the investigation as you can. You're looking for evidence. So anything that can be marked down or tagged as evidence is very important. And we treat it just as any criminal case. It has to be able to be presented in a court of law and accepted by the court. So that's how we go about doing these investigations. We pretty much stay real thorough on them. And then each case is put in their reports are done, and they're put in a computerized file. And these files are locked up. Only the director of the department had access to them.
And so are they always put in as inconclusive on these, or did you ever have, can you talk about any of them that you were ever able to figure out, what happened and it had nothing to do with what you thought it was?
Oh, sure.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we had a guy that came in, and he was telling us, there's these lights that come up over the horizon, and they're blinking and moving around, and every evening at the same time in this direction. And Stan went out there, and he set up a tripod. He put he had a night vision equipment. He had a quad sheet of the area and a compass. And what he did is he waited until dark, and then sure enough, here come the lights. They all started rising from the horizon. and they started blinking off and on, in random deals. And Stan shot an azimuth with a compass. He marked the azimuth on the map, and it turned out that what the guy was seeing was a temperature inversion, where you have a layer of hot air and a layer of cold air. And what was happening is the lights over the next ridge of a small community were, because of that inversion, were rising up like a mirage. And because these lights were seen behind these pinon juniper trees, and the wind was blowing, the trees were blowing and moving, so it looked like the lights were blinking off and on.
Yeah.
And so that was one case that that we solved because of that.
Yeah.
Another case we had was that we had a lady that came back to her home, and she had lived in other states all her life, but her mother had passed away, and she was having visitations by what she determined were skinwalkers that were, and she was trying to fix up this hogan, this little house, 8-sided house that the Navajos traditionally live in. She's replacing the windows, the door's not there, just the roof is on the place. And it's right on the ridge line near a border town. She called the county, she called the state police, she called the city, she called Navajo police. Nobody wanted to take her call because she sounded like a crazy person. So she called us, and me and Stan went over there, and we started tracking. We came up with at least 6 individuals. Now, they were leaving little bundles of feathers and leather, buckskin wrap stuff, little bundles here and there, making it look like something was trying to curse her and drive her out.
Oh.
What we determined, we found a trail going down the backside of the ridge, and you could see where all 6 of them were standing around talking with each other. And what we determined was that these were the local drunks that had been using the mother's abandoned house for years as a crash pad to drink in town and then sleep it off at that location. When she moved back and started fixing up the house, they tried to scare her away. So we told her that these are just the local drunks. They're Navajo drunks, so they're trying to scare you. But don't worry about it. They can't hurt you. And a month later, our dispatcher got a phone call from the same lady, and she was in tears. She was crying on the phone, and she said that she called just because we had helped her, and her house was all fixed, and she has no more issues, and she just wanted to call us and thank us.
Wow, isn't that nice? Well, yeah. So I imagine you always have to, like anyone else, especially with your background, you have to you have to follow the facts and just wherever they lead. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that are just very scared at whatever it is that's happening.
We found out early on that, especially in hauntings, if you allow fear to come in, you actually lend it energy to manifest more.
Sure.
And so we would approach these things just like going into a gunfight where, bullets are flying and things like that. We've been shot at numerous times. And you do what you have to do. And then later on, you take a deep breath and you go, wow, Now, for both me and Stan, when we do these cases, we would smoke ourselves afterwards and do our prayers and for cleansing and protection.
Now, have you or Stan actually ever had a sighting yourselves?
Both of us have for UFOs, yeah.
Can you talk? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, my first sighting was in 1984, and I had just left the tribe at the time, and I was working for the city of Winslow, Arizona Police Department, and I was doing graveyards. Um, I was heading home with my then wife, um, and we're on a dirt road out in the middle of nowhere, um, and I see what looks like a large cigar-shaped craft flying from east to west toward Flagstaff, out in the middle of the desert. It's about less than a quarter mile away from me. And what I notice is that it has a bright light in the front of it. There's no marker lights on the whole thing, but there's a bright light shining down, almost like a pencil beam. That's how would you say, coherent light. It's fine. It's rigidly defined along its edges, and all the way to the ground. It's going about 15, 20 miles an hour tops, so it's going real slow. Now, in those days, X-Files was real big on TV. So I remember I was driving a Volkswagen Bug, and I stopped the car, turned off the engine. I looked at my time on my watch and marked the time, and I got out and watched this thing. I think if it would have stopped, I would have walked up to it and asked it if I could get a ride. I was so curious. And meanwhile, my ex-wife was screaming bloody murder. Get in the car, you know. And I just watched it till it went out of sight. And this thing had a really, really heavy noise. It was this heavy metallic rum, 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 like that, just really loud. And but other than that, it just drifted toward the west, toward a bunch of cinder cones that are around Flagstaff. And I got back in the car, started it back up. We went back to the house. We lived at the time out on the res, so there's no electricity, there's no running water. And as we pulled up to the house, a shooting star flew across the sky. And I remember she says, "They're coming back." And the door flew open and she was inside the house. And so she was terrified. Years later, I asked her, I ran into her and I says, "Hey, do you remember that? What happened?" And she looked me dead in the eye and she says, "It never happened." So
That's not I'm sure you probably know that's not an uncommon theme when it comes to this topic. A lot of people just don't want to talk about it, or it never happened.
Yeah. So that was one of the first ones. From then, I've seen discs, I've seen triangles, I've seen orbs. Me and Stan were together. We were talking about a case that I had worked on near Loop, and I was pointing to a cinder hill where this orb had come down and gone along the side of this girl that was driving home late at night, and then it shot in front of her and then made a right angle turn, went up in the sky and shot across the sky like a shooting star. And I was pointing to the area where this thing had come down the hill. Just then, a round white ball of light appeared, a little bigger than a basketball. And you could see a cone of light shining down to the ground, and you could see the ground illuminated underneath it. And then it just, we looked at each other, and just as I had pointed at it, it showed up, and then it blinked out. And man, we slammed on the brakes, turned around, went back over there. We were out with our flashlights looking around because it was just maybe about 50 feet off the road, and we didn't see anything.
Wow, amazing.
Both saw that one.
You see, when I noticed when I was out there, I don't know, what is it, 4 or 5 weeks ago, whenever it was, I was out there, I noticed Wow, you can really see the sky, especially if you get away from the light pollution. It's just such wide open country and beautiful sky. So that is probably one of the reasons that Arizona has some of the highest amount of UFO sightings, in this country. I think it's right up there, third. A lot of times, California usually is first, but I think Arizona is usually second or
Yeah,
third if I have it right. And so,
yeah, it's
what type of
and
land? Yeah,
out
go
on
ahead. Yeah,
okay. I was going to say on Navajo, we even have less light pollution because there's communities, but outside of the communities, I mean, you can look up in the sky and see the Milky Way.
right. It's just beautiful. What kind of land coverage does the Navajo Nation have as far as square miles where you're involved? We're involved.
Uh, where I was involved, there's 27,000 square miles of land. Uh,
Amazing.
yeah, so it's a lot of land to cover. Um, Essentially, from if you look north of Flagstaff all the way across to near Albuquerque, New Mexico, and up north all the way to into Utah and up to the Colorado border. Um, yeah, so
Just,
it's a lot of land. It'll take you about 5 hours to drive across it.
just out of curiosity, this has nothing to do with the topic, but I just don't understand how these things work. Is the Navajo Nation basically under their own governing laws, or is it follow the states? Like, for instance, you're partially in Arizona, you're partially in New Mexico. Do you have to follow the guidelines of that state, or is it your own conditions? I just don't know how that works.
Well, the Navajo Nation, along with a lot of other tribes, have a sovereign government.
Yeah,
So the U.S. government deals with us on a State Department level. Um, we are basically a country within a country. So we have our own laws that apply to natives that live out here. But in the case of Anglos, when I went to the police academy, my academy was 6 months long. I had to be certified in New Mexico and in Arizona and with the federal government as a law enforcement officer. And I carried a federal citation book and I carried a tribal citation book. Uh, in the case of people speeding on Navajo Nation, I would write them a federal citation under the what they call the Assimilative Crimes Act and specify the state statute that they broke in speeding, and send that citation into magistrate court under the federal.
I see. Wow. That can get pretty complicated, it seems.
It can be. We maintain, in a lot of cases, you have concurrent jurisdiction, which is the county officers would be commissioned under the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo Nation officers would be commissioned under the county. And that seemed to work out pretty nicely too.
Yeah. We have just 3 minutes until we go into the break. So if you get just part way into answering my question, we'll continue it on the other side of the break. But I'm going to ask you, what is the strangest thing that you ever had to investigate when you were doing these so-called paranormal investigations?
Well, the strangest thing that ever happened to me, and it happened to me directly, so it wasn't investigated per
Oh,
se,
okay.
as much as just recorded.
Hmm.
But I was on a drive to get my oil changed up in Tuba City. Um, the drive takes you on Route 2 for 47 miles to 264 state route to Tuba City. That's 58 miles. And I made this trip once a month for years. And on the way over, I'm driving by the Denebito Dam, and I'm on a straight section of road, and I'm looking in front. It's pre-dawn. The sun's just barely on the other side of the horizon, and it's getting light. And I looked in front of me, and it's like miles and miles of straight road. I looked behind me in my rearview mirror, same thing. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, I was coming to a sharp turn. That turn was at Coal Mine Mesa, 15 miles down the road. So I thought, wow, did I just go to sleep and go on autopilot? When I got to Tuba City, I usually have about 15 minutes to stop at McDonald's and get myself a breakfast, cup of coffee, go drive over to the fleet management and wait at the gate, and I'll be the first one in to get my oil change. On this particular date, I stopped at the McDonald's. I went to the gate and parked there, and I was 45 minutes early.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's opposite of missing time, right?
Yeah. And
you gain time.
Aliens abducted you, and put you down in the wrong time. I even had one person tell me that I hit the event horizon of a microscopic black hole, and it's changed time for me.
Oh, that would work. Well, very interesting. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. We have to go into the break, and I do want to talk about this quickly. The gentleman's name is who's on this video that I'm going to be recording, that I am going to be posting. His name is Stuart Seymour, and he contacted me and commented about a UFO sighting. And I'm going to have the full video is going to break at midnight, like I did the last one with Albert Wayne. This is one that happened in just recently. So we're going to go into the break at KGRA Radio. We'll be back in 4 minutes, right after this. All right, Stu. Thank you so much for getting in touch with me. And you just had a sighting.
I did 2 days ago.
Yeah. First of all, can you say where are you located?
Certainly. So I'm located in a village called Holbridge, which is in Essex, the county of Essex, which is around about 30 miles outside of London, down on the south east coast of the UK.
So you were outside. Let's hear what happened.
Okay, so we've got a little cottage here, small holding, a couple of acres, and it was about 9:50, and my wife was doing her horses in the evening, and I thought I'd go out and give her a hand like I usually do, doing the waters, and she was doing all the haze. And when I'm out there, I'm fascinated by the sky anyway, so I'm always looking up and about, and I looked to my right, up in the sky, and it's the strangest thing to say, but it was almost as if I was not told to look, but I was drawn to look up there. And as I look up there, I see a shape that can only describe a cross between a boomerang, a triangle, and we have a chocolate over here called a Terry's chocolate orange, which has orange segments to it, almost this kind of a shape. And it was like that. Now, the sky was super clear, but it was like a dark blue hue because the moon was quite bright. This shape stood out against it because it was so black. But within the shape itself were hundreds and hundreds of small lights. Now, this is the really weird thing. Being a detailer, the first thing for some reason I thought was, well, those lights aren't very bright. And, what are they doing? And they were flickering literally on and off, almost as if glitching, but random like this, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them within the shape itself. The shape was moving the second I saw it. The object was moving the second I saw it. I screamed at my wife to say, look. And while she's looking around trying to catch it, I couldn't take my eyes off it. And literally, I had my hand in my pocket on my phone, and I'm thinking, almost like what you say on one of your podcasts, I can't risk taking my phone out of my pocket, because if I take my eye off it, it's going to do something. So I just put my eye on it while saying to my wife, it's there. And it came across us, as silent, with all these stars and lights going on it. And then it almost like changed shape to a point, to almost like it looked like a giant kind of a kite, still with angular edges, a kite. And then it changed back into its shape again of this boomerang. and it continued directly in front of me with all these lights going, but it was so presented against the night sky. It was so clear. I mean, it was just so clear. And then we just watched it disappear off, float in front of us. And then it did a curve to the right. And then it just carried on and carried on and carried on. And you could see the outline. Suddenly the lights were now the outline of it. And the ones in the middle were starting to fade even more, almost as if it couldn't quite work out how bright to be, or the color. It couldn't get the color correctly, as if it was trying to cloak itself or something, but it just couldn't do it. It just couldn't do it. But it was silent, and it didn't speed off. It was one speed, but it just reminded me of a cartoon, or no, a ghost floating by, like you see on movie, just silent, and it did this, and then it was gone.
Now, did it never change speed at all?
It never changed speed at all. And the other thing, it was silent. Not only the craft was silent, but the atmosphere, as it was going on, with me shouting. Oh, sorry, excuse me. With me shouting.
That music's actually perfect for this. All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis, and let me just take this down. I'm going to bring our guest back in. So I just wanted to say, when it comes to these UFO sightings, these seem to be very popular. As far as people are really loving them. Trying to make the automatic adjusting camera to work here. Doesn't seem to be working. That's okay. Anyway. So these have been really popular, and I would like to say, if you had a sighting you'd like to talk about, just send me an email at martin@podcastufo.com. I'll talk to you on the phone, see if it works out, and if it was something that I think we should post, we will during the commercial breaks, as I've been doing, and the full video of this, it gets into other things too as it goes along. That'll come out tonight at midnight, and there was one other thing I wanted to say about this. Oh, yes, Stuart Seymour, who had this sighting. He just sent me this morning, a video of something else he videoed over the property where he lives at. And it was like a triangular craft. There it goes. Triangular craft. And to me, it looked like it was dropping something out of the bottom of it. So weird goings on there in Hillbridge, where he lives. But anyway, I do appreciate that. And our guest is back. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Yes, Jonathan. So you were talking about, the speculation, you went into some a black hole or something like that. So you actually gained 45 minutes. Usually, as you know, I'm sure you've heard many times people talk about missing time, but you actually gained 45 minutes, which is another weird. That's almost seems much weirder than missing time. It's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, and I have gone through places where I've had missing time. It's very disconcerting because you're going down the road, usually at night. You pass a location that it's a kind of a landmark location, and you're driving and you're thinking, okay, I've just got a few more miles before I get home. And then seems like you're going forever, another 10, 15 minutes. You should have been home. And suddenly you pass the same landmark again. And, you're sitting there going, what the heck? I thought I was almost home. How come I'm passing this thing a second time? That's happened to me on several occasions. And it got to the point where it actually got annoying enough that I put a dash cam camera under my mirror in the front, and I just got a new one. It's now 4K camera in the front, and I've got a rear-facing camera in the back. So ever since I put camera in the front of my vehicle, I haven't had any sightings, and that's okay with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they know. They know the camera's there. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, interesting. And what are there other people that you there? I know there's a lot of cases that you've investigated, but are there other people that talk about missing time that you've actually talked to?
Yeah, we've actually talked to other people. Uh, some of them have said that they don't know what happened, or maybe they weren't aware, but there were circumstances in their encounters where they appear to be missing time, but they're not aware of it at all.
Hmm.
But during their interviews, it comes up that, hey, this is you start keying into that stuff. You don't ask them about it. You let them relate what they know. You don't
Right.
ask a leading question. You don't uh,
Yes.
you just get the facts as they know it. But it's always interesting to run into situations like that where you say, hey, they could have, there's something there that, could have happened, but, you just leave it in the realm of speculation.
Right, right. And what about some? Let's talk about some other encounters that involve UFOs. Some of the stories that you can tell that you've had to, investigate. Again, is it always with your partner at that when you were doing? I know you're not doing that now, but when you were doing it, was it always with Stan?
Uh, a lot of times he would take cases on his own, and I would take cases on my own. And if we were in a position or the case was a big enough case, we would both do them. So he's investigated Bigfoot cases on his own, and I've done some on my own. Um, and haunting cases are the same way. So we split up, or we may come together to collaborate because we had such a large area of ground to cover.
Right, right. So let's go into some of the other encounters.
Okay, so uh, this one, we would consider it probably the most well-known case that we worked on. We call it the old man case. Uh, Subject is in his 80s, and he's an elderly Navajo man that contacts us. Um, he says that he had a craft come over his house in the middle of the night, and it lands up on the ridge about a quarter mile away. And he has, in the Navajo language, there is no word for alien. So he's referring to them as little children come around his house about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. He's got no electricity, no running water, got an outhouse in the back, and he's got these solar lights around his house. And he says that 4 little kids came to his house after that landing, and they're walking around outside. He describes them as having big heads, black eyes. Um, they're wearing a light colored outfit, either light gray or white, that's skin tight. And he says that they're walking around shining these, what he calls a flashlight, something in their hand that's shooting out a beam, a pencil beam of about a half inch to 1 inch. And that beam is solid in color, and one is red, blue, yellow, and green. And so each one has a different color, and they're shining it, looking like they're looking for something on the ground. And he watches them out of the window of the house. Earlier, he had been standing outside when this thing landed or hovered. And he says that his dog, which was a pup, is a blue heeler, takes off running and barking toward where the things are coming down the hill. And he hears it in the dark go yipe, and then it comes running back to the house, lays down by the front doorstep, curls into a ball, and doesn't move. There was another dog there that had just had pups. That was a pit bull on a chain. And when we were there doing the investigation, this pit bull was coming off the, like it was going to break the chain, seriously. And, it looked like it could have taken us all on. But when that thing came to the house, he said that dog stayed in its house and would not come out and didn't make a sound. So we get there to do the investigation, and that pup, the blue heeler, is jumping all over us with muddy paws. And if you're in uniform, you don't like mud all over your uniform. So we're trying to push it away and, get away from us, that kind of thing. We had a crew there that was taking background radiation readings. And one of the girls, a real dog lover, she's wearing a white Tyvek suit. And she's calling the dog saying, come here, boy, and it saw that white suit. It ran to the front of the house and curled up in a ball and wouldn't come. So obviously you have some kind of an association with a light colored suit.
Huh.
Wow. We interviewed him a total of 3 times over 4 years. Once on our own, once with MUFON, investigator out of Phoenix, and once with a couple of investigators that were working for Bigelow Aerospace Research. And in those 3 interviews, which were all taped, he talked about the Navajo oral tradition. His story never changed. It was just the same matter-of-factly. And he said that he actually got upset because these little kids were around his house. He was going to go outside and confront them. So he grabs one of these dry cell flashlights, kind of a big square one. And as he's going down the steps of the house, he tripped and fell. Now, at 80 years plus, if you fall, that could be serious business. And he says that when he fell, he broke his flashlight. And as he looked up, he saw these things. They were in line with each other, drifting back up the hill like they were almost astride something, and just literally hovering and going back up the hill. So, and he said that they didn't make any sound.
Wow. Yeah.
So, he called us out there, and we, looked around for evidence, interviewed him rather meticulously. And at the end, we wrote our reports on it and locked them up. As an aside to this case, a little bit on the humorous side, we were contacted a year later, and it was a production company that wanted to interview him, and they said they're willing to pay him a lot of money. Could we contact him and see if he'd be willing to be on TV? And we contacted him, and he said, absolutely not. I didn't do this for notoriety or to be well known or anything, and I don't want money. He says, I just reported it. And so we went back and told the production company that he didn't want to talk to them. And they told us that we saw your CMS report the first time it was submitted to MUFON before they took it down the next morning. And we're going to go out there and talk to him anyway.
Huh.
So me and Stan looked at each other and we said, okay, go ahead, have fun. And hung up on them. We didn't tell them that when we submitted our CMS report that we had put the location 100 miles away from where it actually occurred. So,
bravo.
They want.
Yeah. I thought I was going to hear a story about the pit bull. So attacking them or something like that. But anyway, well, serve them right. But is that something you would often do, just so you're just wanted to make sure people remain anonymous?
Yeah, we would tell people that we guaranteed their anonymity. And that was one of the reasons why a lot of people came forward to speak to us about these cases. They did not want to be ridiculed. They did not want people to be laughing at them or family members to know about it.
When you were investigating that particular case, I don't know what the ground is like there. I know a lot of where I walked, you wouldn't really see footprints, but some places you had mentioned, like where you cast those Bigfoot prints and things like that. But did you look in this particular case to see if you could find any evidence of tracks leading down from the hill where this supposedly was?
Yes, we did. We hiked that entire ridge line. We even went up there with a dosimeter looking at radiation readings and trying to get background radiation readings to see if there was an increase. We were looking for ground effects left over. We didn't find any, so we assumed that whatever it was probably hovering. On the ground at the bottom, we found a series of small circular marks in the snow that were in a straight line.
Oh, in the snow. There was snow there.
Yeah, it was patches of snow and mud.
Oh, wow.
And these tracks were all in a straight line going for about maybe 30 yards or so.
So when you're interviewing someone like this, I have talked to other, policemen that I've known over the years and stuff like that, but they really watch the body language. I'm sure you did that. And did you feel pretty confident that this gentleman was, straight with you? And did you also think that, did he have a fear about this?
We noticed that there was no fear. He was very concerned when he heard the dog yelp, and the dog came running back. In fact, several weeks later, after we did our initial investigation, that blue heeler pup died.
Oh, really?
And the family didn't tell us about it. Otherwise, we would have had it necropsied. But we never determined what caused that, but we think it might have had something to do with the contact with the occupants of that vehicle that was up on top of the ridge.
So that's actually the same dog that went after whatever it was and then came back, yelped and came back?
Yeah, that's the same dog.
Wow. Yeah, that's too bad. That's sad. Oh, interesting. So in a case like this,
and we would rate him as far as being a witness and putting him on the stand as a very reliable witness. He actually spoke in Navajo the whole time. We brought in a federal court interpreter that was interpreting, doing simultaneous translation for us. So this is somebody who has gone through a course to interpret for Navajo people at the federal court level. And simultaneous translation is very difficult to do. As they're speaking, you're speaking and relating exactly what they're saying.
Wow, interesting. And so when you, in a situation like that, how are you alerted to this particular situation when something like this happens?
Well, in this case, it was a ranger that worked in that area that had heard about it and had talked to the old man and relayed that information to us and says, hey, we got this thing going on over here. After we did the investigation, we maintained contact with that family for about 4 years, checking in on them every now and then to see if they were doing okay.
And no, in this particular case, there was no reoccurrence?
No reoccurrence.
Interesting. And so, you hear of someone that doesn't have any electricity or running water, and I'm assuming that means no telephone, any way to communicate. you're kind of isolated. That could be a scary situation for most people, but I imagine they're just used to that way of life.
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, we've gone on rescue operations during like winter snow lifts or mud lifts where people can't get out on the roads, on the dirt roads, and we go in on snowmobiles or on 4-wheel ATVs and stuff, and or 6-wheel 6x6 truck, deuce and a half, and meet with the families back there to see if they need food, water, supplies, whatever. The 20-something-year-olds are in dire need because they can't get out that night to get pizza. Every old couple that we run into, grandma and grandpa, we ask them, do you have enough water? And they just point to all the snow and they say, yeah, there's plenty of water here. And we ask them if they have food, and they open up their cupboard and there's all kinds of dried corn and everything else in there that could last them all winter. They've got a big wood pile. They're set. They say, we don't need any help. But 20-something-year-olds, yeah, they need help.
Yeah, that's right. If we ever lost our power or something, those people would survive and we wouldn't. That's how that would go.
That's right.
Yeah, interesting. So that case is really fascinating, and you mentioned that you took some equipment out and you checked to see if there was any radiation or anything like that. Is that typical? Do you have that equipment for other types of cases, or is it just for when you're doing these type of when you were doing these type of cases?
Mainly for what we call ground occupant sightings. If we have something that is considered out of the ordinary, that might need a closer look at it, we'll bring more outside interest to bear on it, like the Environmental Protection Agency or whatever. But for normal cases, we would have flybys, which is, I saw this object, appear here and disappeared over there, and they're pointing at the sky. You can take the report on that, collate it with other reports, but the chances are is you're not going to go any further than that.
Right. Yeah. Now, you mentioned the other things that you've investigated, witchcraft, which is fascinating, and also hauntings. I don't know if there's other UFO. I mean, this show, of course, is about UFOs, so I'd rather mostly stick to that topic. But if do you have other UFO cases you can talk about?
Oh, sure. I talked about that case up in Shiprock where we were doing the Bigfoot investigation. After that, we left in the evening. By the time I'm getting home, it's about 2:00 in the morning, and I'm on the road in my vehicle, in my tribal vehicle. So it's a law enforcement vehicle. We got red and blue lights on it and all that kind of good stuff. And I'm in a place called Indian Wells, Arizona, which is near Delcon, about 15 miles away from Delcon. And as I'm driving, I drive through this area on Navajo Route 15 called the Sugar Bowl. Sugar Bowl is a valley where the highway goes down into it, and then you climb up and out the other side. And so the officers and everybody just call it Sugar Bowl. And as I came out of it, on the right-hand side of the road, I see what looks like a green ball, and it's lit up pretty brightly. But I'm thinking it's probably somebody's street light that they have near their house, something like a mercury vapor light. So I keep driving down the road, and pretty soon I keep seeing this green ball behind me, maybe about a couple of 100 yards, and then it approaches to about 100 yards. now I'm watching it pretty intently in my rearview mirror. And I'm thinking to myself, should I turn around and head on with it and see what it is? Or should I pull over to the side of the road and let it catch up and pass me? You know, and I've just got all these thoughts going through my head. And one of the things that I don't do is I don't think, you know, should I get out and shoot at it? Because obviously that could be the wrong thing to do. And but that's what we do, right? We poke at things with a stick and throw rocks at it. So as I'm watching this thing, it veered off the road to the left or to the south of the road just before I get to Delcon, and goes out through where there's no dirt roads. It's just drifting over the grass, and I can see the ground lit up under it. And as I watch it, it goes up on top of, about a mile off the road, it goes on top of this little mesa. And from there, it started to parallel my course. And as it started doing that, the light turned from green to red. And now I'm thinking, I'm getting this weird feeling, and I've never had it before or since, that there's a malevolent intent, that this thing does not mean me well. And so now I'm watching it quite a bit, but I'm still going down the road. And I went a total of, 15, 20, about 25 miles total with this thing following me and then going along the side of me. And it stayed on top of the mesa tops to my left as I'm driving. And it suddenly just faded out and disappeared.
Wow.
So that was a real weird one for me. I always wonder what would have happened if I had turned around and gone head on with it to see what it was. But
very interesting. Wow. I have something that I'm going to share with you that someone out there told me a story about, but you just reminded me when you said about the mesa. But someone in the chat wanted me to ask you about a giant rabbit. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yeah, I do know. It's involving another case. A young lady was coming home in the middle of the night. She worked late nights, and she has an encounter with a red orb. And as she's going down the road, this orb changed from something about the size of a beach ball to something about a little bit bigger than a softball, but smaller than a volleyball. And now it's white, and it's flying right along the left side of her car as she's driving down the road. This thing speeds up, zips in front of her, and then makes a right angle turn and goes over the horizon like a shooting star. She said she's looking over the top of her steering wheel at it. When she gets home, she pulls into her driveway. There's a dirt area on the side because there's another vehicle parked on the concrete driveway. And in front of her is a large rabbit. She says 3.5 to 4 feet tall to the top of the head. And the ears are together and straight back at an angle. She says this thing has black eyes. The fur, she knows what a jackrabbit looks like and what a cottontail looks like. And she says the fur on this is speckled, almost like a pepper look, brown and black all over. No marks on it, defining marks. And she says as she watches it, it doesn't move, it doesn't blink. And she stopped her car just short of where she usually parks because this thing was in the way. And she's talking to she calls her brother who's in Phoenix on the phone and says, okay, I'm going to make a run for the door. If you don't hear from me, call somebody else that can come look for me. And she opens the door backs out of the car and goes around the back of the car, heads for the door of the house, gets in, locks the door. She didn't sleep that night, obviously. And the next day she had a migraine headache all day, and she's never had a migraine in her life. So when I did the investigation on it, we looked at where her vehicle was parked. And in front of it, the ground is that caliche clay. And it's about 3 inches or so under is a limestone base. So it's very, very hard ground. You kick it with a boot and you couldn't break the soil until you kicked it several times. And in the evening or late in the evening, I went back out there with a flashlight because you could see disturbance to the soil in front of her car. And I put a flashlight on the ground and took pictures of it. And you could see where something had been sitting there. So obviously something was there that broke that ground and made some marks. They were indistinct, but there were marks. I contacted MUFON, and they said pull the oil filter. I was put in touch with Chuck Modlin, who was the STAR team member at that time, and he instructed me to take a compass and go around the car and look for magnetic anomalies. What we found was a magnetic area in front of the front door, about middle, and the other area where the needle pinned was just behind the driver's door on the side of the vehicle. If you took a string and put a string between those two places, it would go right through the driver. So whatever it was must have flashed something at her that went through her and created magnetic anomalies on the surface of the vehicle. Shortly after that, her alternator went out, her water pump had gone out. She ended up getting rid of the car because of the electronic problems.
How about that? I'm going to try an experiment. I have a phone line here that I have now for, I'm going to put the number up. I have this number for when I do the Everything Else show, taking calls when I'm not on KGRA radio, with Bill helping me out, which is a case tonight because you're actually on that phone line. So I have a new number posted. It's 207-482-0556. So here's the thing. If you're going to call in, I'm going to have to put you on hold, and then I'm going to put you on speakerphone. I'm not going to be able to screen the call, so be nice. And I will take calls at this point if someone wants to call in at 207-482-0556. I actually hope someone calls in because I haven't been able to test this out. You're going to be my guinea pig, whoever calls in. And the number's up on the screen. And so that line is open and ready for you to call in. And so this is that story is, the weird stories like that. I heard Greg Bishop say this. I'm kind of parroting what he says, but I kind of agree with him that I love the strange stories because they seem in some way more credible. As how could you make something up like that? It's such a bizarre thing. I do want to tell you what I was told out there from a woman that I was out walking my dog at the time, and I saw this woman outside the casino when I was at, the International UFO Congress over when I was at Wikipa Resort, and I was out walking the dog, and she's running around smoking, and we do have a caller. So I'm going to go back into that thought because I really have to try this out, see how it works. And I will finish that story in just a minute. Caller, you are live on the air right now, and just keep in mind you have to mute whatever you're listening to. So there you are, caller. Your name and where are you from?
Hi, Martin. This is Bob Gross. I'm calling from the Chicago area.
Hi there. How are you? Welcome.
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being my guinea pig. I hope the people can hear. I hope the people can hear on this show. So you have a question for our guest tonight?
Yes. As you know, I used to live on the Navajo reservation.
That's right.
And I wanted to ask him if he heard any of the stories that the Native Americans that lived in Greasewood Springs, Arizona, used to tell about the UFO sightings that they would see there.
Yeah, about the UFO sightings in Greasewood. We had
I
a lot
was talking with the tribal members there, and they were describing that they were regularly seeing these UFOs in the Greasewood Springs area. And I want to know if he had heard or investigated any of that.
Yeah, we investigated a case where we had UFOs actually flying into Satan Butte, which is in that Greasewood area. And they were actually flying into the butte.
Right.
We also found out that Satan Butte is on the same longitude that Skinwalker Ranch is located at. So we had a lot of the same kind of things going on there.
Yes, but the people, the elders from the tribe were telling me that it was so regular that they were taking their lawn chairs and they would sit out in their lawns and watch the UFOs fly in and land.
Yeah.
And some of them looked like tuna fish cans with lights around them.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Yep. That whole area there, from the Transwestern station up toward on the top of the hill, all the way down through Greasewood Springs, down toward Tanner Wash and No Water Mesa. We've seen a lot of activity, and we've seen a lot of military activity with helicopter flyovers in that area.
Yes, I used to work with young Jeff Tom, and back when Joe Shirley was with the tribe, and there were a lot of strange things that happened all the time, especially with working with the medicine men in Borrego Pass, is where I used to live.
Okay, I'm familiar with that area too. Yeah, all over the whole place. We actually had a young girl who was visiting her grandmother, and in front of the hogan, there's a shadow that blocked out the light, and the young girl's looking out, and she says, Grandma, look, and there was a 7 or 8 foot disc hovering right in front of the hogan door. And the grandmother turned and looked at her, and she says, don't worry about them. She says, they're always around here.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
That was kind of the story.
Well,
listen, it was nice talking with you. I guess I had some wild times out there.
Hi, thanks for the call, Dr. Bob Gross.
Sure.
Thanks for the call. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye now. He was a guest previously on this show. Well, that's as I was continuing this. So I met this girl that when I was walking my dog, she worked at the casino, and she said, "So what's going on next door?" And I said, "Well, it's a UFO. It's basically a UFO convention, the International UFO Congress." And she said, "Oh, well, I should check that out because I had a UFO sighting." And so I asked her. I said, "Well, I always love when this happens because you hear a fresh story that you've never heard before." And she said that she was driving along with her friend through, in that area, but she said they saw something black coming off the top of a mesa and heading over toward their car, and it was something really big, and it followed them. She got scared, closed the sunroof, wouldn't look up. And so her friend hit the gas, and they were doing, about 100 miles an hour or so for many, many miles. And then she said, well, I guess we got away from it. She said, but the strangest thing happened. She said, the biggest owl I've ever seen or ever could believe in my life, all of a sudden was right there in front of the car. We almost hit it. And it's kind of like a bizarre story like the
Right.
rain, you know?
Well, we're told by UFO investigators with MUFON that these could be what they call screenshot memories
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah.
of aliens being revealed to us. They actually manipulate our minds to think of other things like a deer, an owl,
Yeah. Yeah.
a butterfly, something that would not normally hurt us. So we're not going to be fearful of it, but the proportions are wrong.
Huh? Yeah. Isn't that something? I mean, that really is a fascinating thought into this. Can you explain to, I've heard it talked about before, and I read the book that George Knapp first wrote, not his latest one, but the first one on the Skinwalker Ranch. But what is the tradition of what a skinwalker is supposed to be?
Skinwalker is a person who chooses to learn how to do this. There are groups of people that have been taught this stuff from medicine men. I had a grandfather that was trained to be a medicine man from a very young, maybe 8 or 10 years old. And he became a Christian and later on became a pastor of a church. And his testimony was about, the things that, that he turned down being a medicine man. He told me that when you're a medicine man, you're taught all of these things, including the black arts, because you have to know how to heal people that have been cursed, and you have to know how the curses are done in order to help them. So it's up to you to have social responsibility about using that kind of knowledge. Likewise, there are others that practice witchcraft that don't know anything about the medicine men, but they know how to make poisons and they know how to change, and they're shapeshifters. They can shapeshift into anything that they have the DNA in their possession of, which includes you and me. So Navajo children are taught from a very young age, you don't leave your fingernail clippings laying around, you don't leave your hair laying around, like you take it out of the brush, dispose of it. Don't leave your any bodily fluids or anything where somebody else can get a hold of it. So that's what you're taught when you're small, and you take that into your adult life. Because of the witchcraft, they can take that stuff and mimic you and get close to somebody to poison them or to harm them. Wow. So, and they can change shape into animals, into birds, and it's mainly used for evil purposes. To become one, you have to know somebody that can teach you, and you have to kill somebody who's very dear to you.
Oh, wow. And that's not a club I want to be part of.
Initiation.
Yeah.
Right.
So I wonder, for instance, they talk about Skinwalker Ranch. Why did that? Do you have any idea at all why that was named that?
Yeah, I do. The Uinta Basin up there. It's said that, and I have my own opinion about this, but historically, it's said that the Utes, when Kit Carson and the cavalry came to the reservation to round up the Navajos, it wasn't like a cattle roundup where you just corral everybody and round them up and push them. This was war, and this was war on the scale of Sherman's March to the Sea, where fields were pulled up, salted, homes were burned to the ground, everything was destroyed in order to round up the Navajos, and a lot of Navajos died. When they were rounded up, they were forced marched to Bosque Redondo, in New Mexico, a distance of some 300 miles. And if you fell out, you were killed. So a lot of Navajos died on the way over there. And this is 1864. So because the Utes had provided military scouts for the cavalry troops, it's said that upon return in 1868, that a lot of the Navajo medicine men cursed the Ute land up there with skinwalkers. Now, it sounds like a rather interesting story. However, in looking at the petroglyphs up there in that area and on Skinwalker Ranch, I believe, it's my opinion, based on evidence that I see, that these things were going on long before that time, as far back to 700, 900 years ago, that they were seeing high strangeness in that area. And the native peoples in that area were doing offerings and prayers at these locations to stem off the evil in that area. So I think it's always been there.
Yeah, yeah. That's I've always wondered why certain things seem to happen in certain areas, but it seems to me that the area that you have been involved in seems like there's a heck of a lot of activity going on there. Besides UFOs, I heard you say the word haunting. So what has happened in that type of situation?
Well, I can give you a very recent case that was actually told to me just like a couple of weeks ago.
Sure.
And this involves in Window Rock. Window Rock is the capital of the Navajo Nation. And so there's a lot of buildings there from the 1930s, 1920s that were built out of stone. And not only that, but along from San Benito, Window Rock, all the way to Fort Defiance was where the Navajos were held by the military before the march to Bosque Redondo. So a lot of people died there. And at an office there, I won't say which office, some housekeeping people were coming in at night to clean. And there's a long hallway, and they walk down the hallway to the end office. And as they opened the door, the girl saw a tall, dark figure standing there in the corner of the room. And that figure, as it looked at her, put its finger up to its lips to say, "Be quiet." She in turn turned around and ran down the hallway. She had turned on the lights there, but she says this thing still looked like a shadow figure. She runs down and gets the other two housekeeping staff. They all go back there, and they open the door and they look around, and that figure is still standing there. And the guy ducked into the room, turned out the lights, and they all ran back down the hallway. And from then on, they wouldn't clean that building until while it was dark. They would only go there when it was light.
Can't say I blame them. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So that was just recently.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was just recently. Yes.
Yeah. And when you say the witchcraft, is that what you were talking about? Like the traditions of you don't leave any anything DNA around? Is that mostly that, or is that have you had to investigate happenings that involve that?
Well, we did one case where a family came to us and they said that they had come home and there was a coyote trying to get into the sheep pen. And so that everybody out there carries a 22. So the man and his wife, are coming home. They see this. Man jumps out, grabs his rifle, and bang, shoots the coyote in the side. hit it back in the hips, and the coyote went down and started dragging itself with its front feet into the tumbleweeds. And he went up there. This is late in the evening. He went up there and holding the rifle in his right hand, reached down with his left hand, grabs the hind leg and drags it out. And he's walking with it to drag it out in the open so he can shoot it again. As he was dragging it out, he says that this coyote leg turned into a human leg in his hand. And he looked down, and there was a skinny man. If you were to take a sponge and dip it in white paint and blotch it all over yourself, and then the paint dried and started cracking, that's what this guy looked like. And he says even his hair was painted. It had blotch paint on it. And he was in a loincloth. And he says that he dropped the leg and he looked at this thing, and his wife says, what do we do now? You already shot it. Do we kill it? Because they knew what it was. It was a skinwalker. And he said, or do we call an ambulance? So they ended up calling an ambulance, and they called the police. The police showed up at their residence, and the Navajo officers didn't want anything to do with this thing. The ambulance showed up, and it's a Navajo ambulance. And the crew looked at it, and you could tell that, I guess, they were fearful of it too. But they put it on the gurney, strapped it on, and they took it into the hospital. At the local hospital, the Anglo doctors chased all the Navajo staff out of the emergency room and did emergency surgery on this guy. And they saved him. So the family was asking us, what do we do now? It's going to come back and get revenge. And they were very fearful. And then they just happened to mention that, oh, and by the way, we know who this guy is. He lives in our community. And we were able to tell them, according to Navajo tradition, that if you know the identity of one of these things, you can go up there, knock on their door, and tell them, I know who and what you are. And within 3 days, in a traditional sense, they will die suddenly. And I've actually seen that happen with some of these things. So the family said, okay, they went away feeling like they had an ace in their sleeve now, and they weren't fearful anymore.
Jeez. That's one crazy story, I'll tell you. That's really something.
Yeah, Stan actually knew some people that worked at the hospital, and they verified that incident did happen.
Wow. That's really something. Well, we have about 3 minutes left here, and we have to stop right at the at that time. But so as far as what you're doing now, you're basically retired. Are you still looking into these type of things in any type of way at all, or assisting Stan in any type of way?
Stan is no longer with the Rangers. He has moved in the world. He is now working for the office of the chief prosecutor as a senior investigator doing white collar crime. And so he's got a plate full with some new cases. But he's getting paid a little more, so that's good for him for retirement purposes.
Right.
Me, I just retired from a medical manufacturing company in Flagstaff, and so I call myself retired, and I'm getting ready to look into drawing my Social Security. So yeah.
Now, when you so if you're about that age, then did you ever hear about the Socorro incident when that happened, or were you too young?
Yeah. No, I heard about it because I read about it in books at that time, the Lonnie Zamora incident.
Right.
And so I am familiar with it.
Yeah. So that was, I think, 1966, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, when we got into this type of work, I had to do a lot of reading to know what kind of questions to ask, and work with MUFON investigators that could steer me in the right direction on investigations. So yeah, I did a lot of reading.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I
Well,
appreciate all your
really
time
enjoyed
and very, very interesting stories. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you everybody for listening.
And I also want to thank you too for driving all the way over to where you are so you had a better signal. That really was very thoughtful of you. Take care now.
Okay.
And Merry Christmas. Yeah. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show tonight. Thank you so much. We'll be back with Graham Randall next week. And for those, again, that are celebrating Christmas, have a wonderful one. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky. You might even see Santa.